Hey, good morning. It's Patrick Lovell truth bombing you on Monday, April 3rd, 2023 at 9 a.m. my time. And, I was pretty much on fire yesterday on Twitter because I got released from Twitter jail because I had been put in Twitter jail because I had commented critically of Fox News on Laura Ingram's Twitter feed. And I had said something along the lines of, being facetious, that really the only justice that we could all hope for in the case of Fox News is for all of the Fox personalities to wind up tarred and feathered in Rikers. I thought it was kind of funny. It was kind of funny. And on a level of, dangerous or, volatile in context of what I've seen on Twitter, I think we'd all agree that it was probably maybe at best, let's call it first base. But hey, you know what? It might be an indication that Fox News, pays heavy duty fees to make sure that trolls are ejected from their feeds. And also, like I mentioned before, it might also just be simply a reflection that on Twitter you can say whatever you want as long as you say it on your tweet. And I think that might be the case because as a result, I had a chance to utilize a different Twitter account that I didn't even know I had. A colleague of mine had set it up. I mean, I knew about it, but I never used it. But I started using it. It had less followers, and it doesn't have quite the I don't know if you want to call it vitriol, but energy that my normal Twitter feed has, and it doesn't have as many followers. So I just kind of felt like I was screaming into a pillow like I normally do. And the bottom line was that I was able to test the fence like it's an electric fence and I was a velociraptor. And so yesterday I started Twitter blitzing, if you will, really not holding back what I think. And it's interesting because I've seen some corollaries of people paying attention but not completely getting in. And we'll see if it's the beginning of something that can actually, maybe I don't know, trigger and spread like wildfire. I certainly hope so. But in context to, a few things that I wanted to address this morning. Look, I didn't watch Lesley Stahl's interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene last night on 60 Minutes. And that and pretty much everything that's happening in the Trump circus underscores and exemplifies exactly why I am attempting to make the connection with you to build a confluence, to build a campaign, to build a people's movement to purge corruption, but doing it utilizing the levels of communication and the information that I have to be able to overwhelm the ocean of madness and lies that happens nonstop. So, for example, when I grew up, 60 Minutes had a level of credibility, of decorum, of what you would expect were serious investigators that would go find shams and reveal them in a way that made the most profound revelations that would then sometimes lead to follow-up investigations by the authorities and ultimately prosecutions. And a lot of times they might target high-level politicians or business people to reveal high-level widespread fraud. Now, that was pretty much standard for their brand, which was an amazing brand. And as a young person growing up in the 70s, I remember being as young as like maybe 10 years old watching 60 Minutes, maybe 8 years old, to be honest with you, with my grandfather. My grandfather was a spectacular guy, the most important guy in my life. And I spent a lot of time at his apartment and my grandmother's apartment on Sundays to watch football. And we always followed it up with 60 Minutes. So I was somebody who understood investigative journalism and quality, when I was a young person, when I was a child. And fast forward literally over 45 years, right? We're talking 45 years since that time period. I can't stomach Lesley Stahl, first and foremost. And I can't stomach 60 Minutes, which is a platform not too dissimilar from Congress. They make believe certain things and certain sort of revelations that at times are interesting, but when it comes to an actual investigative platform with teeth, it's the geriatric version that you have to change your dentures. I mean, they basically don't do anything that would be problematic for their sponsors. And, their sponsors typically are some sort of pharmaceutical company. I mean, I don't know how many, sort of commercials like Oh God, my mind's kind of just streaming with visions of those ads about certain drugs you can take for one problem or another, and they're just so annoying, and then you tend to blot them out. But they make millions of dollars, hundreds of millions, tens of millions, hundreds of $1 million in revenue for the network. And Lesley Stahl, she had the journalistic cred coming up at the time period of Watergate, being one of the first female correspondents to get it right on a story that the entire country was watching because of the lay of the land of media back then. We didn't have 15 million different things to look at. And so you fast forward to 2023 and you realize that, this scenario with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, from what I've observed, and I haven't done the deep dive on, somebody who I think looks like Mr. Ed and talks like one of the biggest schmucks in the history of the world, from what I've seen. And I wouldn't give her a dime a day in terms of credibility or somebody to listen to. I do recognize that she's a MAGA in Congress who helped put McCarthy as the Speaker of the House. So she's certainly got influence, and influence to do what? I mean, if we were to parse her out on any significant subject, whether it was the debt limit or, and I can imagine what Lesley Stahl asked her. I didn't see it, but I can imagine, given what I've just seen in like sound bites or clips on Twitter of what Marjorie Taylor Greene says, that she probably targeted Democrats for, preying upon children in some sort of sex trafficking, kind of like they're the new villains of what we call blood libel, which is a depiction of Jews over, like 1,000 years of basically vampires preying on the innocence of white children. It's a psychological boondoggle, and that's been going on ever since Pizzagate with the Democrats. So I can imagine Marjorie Taylor Greene maybe, using a platform that might reach millions of people to say something retarded like that. I can imagine asking her questions about the Ukraine war. I can imagine asking her questions about the debt ceiling, and she would have really nowhere to start. I mean, for example, and neither does media really with both of those two scenarios, but particularly with somebody as atrociously stupid and buffoonish as Marjorie Taylor Greene, to give her that sort of platform is just part and parcel to what CBS or 60 Minutes has become. They're a whore for ratings, like everybody else, and they'll tell you bullshit. They'll create part of the show to be able to draw in ratings and create hysteria and be in the zeitgeist and to trend for a short period of time. And that's not journalism. That doesn't tell us anything. So, for example, if I were asking Marjorie Taylor Greene questions about Ukraine, I'd ask her questions about Putin. I'd ask her questions about Deutsche Bank. I'd ask her questions about what does she know about Donald Trump's business practices? What does she know about Donald Trump suing Deutsche Bank in 2012 for being a victim of predatory lending? What is predatory lending? How much did Wall Street get away with after the 2009 great financial crisis, and how does that affect the debt ceiling, for example? And just to tie her up in pretzels to show what a fucking idiot she is. That's first and foremost. But I could do the same thing to Lesley Stahl, to be honest with you. She has no credibility. I once watched Lesley Stahl do a piece on the viability of the renewable energy paradigm. And her questions were to the Saudi government. And if you don't understand how unbelievably stupid that is, then I'm going to have a hard time making you understand why I have the revelations of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended, that turns everything inside out, upside down, to reveal what the entirety of media has been covering up, either intentionally, in the case of Rachel Maddow, who's smart enough to get all this stuff, but chooses not to go there, and by her own proclamation last week, I don't get this stuff, when she was talking to Elizabeth Warren. Well, I wonder why that might be, Miss $30 million a year woman. Or Tucker Carlson, who I think has some sort of degree from Yale and Harvard and well-educated and from a very rich family, who cherry picks 44,000 hours of footage from the January 6th insurrection to make it look like we had tourists in Congress and sell that to millions of idiots on Fox. And Fox, by the way, by their own declarations and the subpoenas that the likes of CEO Rupert Murdoch revealed in this Dominion Energy lawsuit, is that, oh yeah, and this is really from the horse's mouth. Sorry to stay with the stay with the analogy, given what I think about Mr. Ed, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or I used to think of John Elway looking like that, by the way. But Mr. Murdoch, the swarmy son of a bitch, that guy is the Australian who came in to basically, pull the wool over millions of people's eyes to create a vertical of lies, because he understands human nature. What did Winston Churchill say all the time? A lie will get around the earth 6 times before the truth has a chance to get its pants on. And yeah, that's how people are, especially dumb people. And that's what they're preying upon left and right. And as a result, we continue to water down the level of what the American populace is capable of understanding. And that's extremely problematic. And I may dare say the end of the world, when you consider that you got to be smart and have character and intuition, and you got to, be a wise ass, like Bugs Bunny portrayed through decades of, what's up, Doc? That was the whole purpose, is to know who's fucking pissing on your head telling you it's rain, which is what I'm telling you, which is the generation I came from, to come up to be able to figure out when shit didn't make sense until it made absolute sense. But I'll come back to that in a minute. So, Donald Trump is going to, just surf, if you will, in his way, glorified way, everything that's going to take place in this first step indictment, trial of Donald J. Trump for charges, at least in the hush money payments, that we know he's guilty of. We know he's guilty of it because his attorney who did it on his behalf went to jail for it, and went to jail for it under his Department of Justice Attorney General. Talking about cherry picking the freaking and using, weaponizing the Department of Justice. But let's just think for just a brief second about who Donald Trump is in the context of what's going to happen. I mean, we've got, I think, 30 charges, most of them related to business fabrication charges, which is pretty much what I show you as the base level of how the entirety of this insane criminality of what we reveal to you in our work, The Con, that you can see at www.thecon.tv. And it's a bit of a miracle that you can see it at all, or will be for a very short time therein. And hence why I'm putting pedal to the metal, because it's not going to be out there forever. And the long and the short of it is that that business documentation fabrication is a felony. And when you lie and you have intent to lie for an outcome, which typically might mean that there might be some sort of upper hand in terms of making money through fraud, which is illegal theft by deception, which is a felony, different degrees depending on the level of intent and how you can prove it. And then ultimately, though, in the case of this, paying hush money payments to a porn star, obviously salacious and in National Enquirer-esque, considering everybody who's involved with it, like the former chairman or the editor-in-chief and I think owner and partner in some way of the National Enquirer, who's been telling bullshit fucking for decades, right? On the shelves of the grocery stores that catch our attention with some just ridiculous fucking headline and some chump show that people actually buy. Okay, that's been a thing since we've had snake oil salesmen, and for some reason the United States has generated generations of incredibly diabolical and gifted snake oil salesmen. And I'm not one of them. But let's move forward in terms of Donald J. Trump, because it's like Marjorie Taylor Greene gets this huge audience to be able to bloviate on whatever bullshit she's selling, to be able to stir up the pot, to get the train, to get people pissed off, to what? Show up maybe in Manhattan and create, a spectacle while their leader, who is just the biggest tool and lion sack of shit in the history of the world, is going to be what? Propped up as like their savior, Jesus fucking Christ? Are you kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? Oh, yeah, well, no, I'm not, because that's how it works. And that's what we're in the midst of. And, I've spent the last week detailing all of the different comparisons and, contrast to what it is that I'm revealing to you, that Trump is now in the spotlight, as he always has been, and where he loves to be. But based on these criminal charges that are coming from all of the different vectors of government, whether it's the AG's office of New York with all of the business control fraud that he's been engaged with for decades. And you got to wonder about statute of limitations on some of this stuff. But from what I understand, I don't think fraud has a statute of limitations, which is extremely important to what it is that I'm revealing to you. And then you have the DOJ dealing last week with what it was criminal fraud exception in the case of whether or not the attorneys were lying. And as I demonstrated to you last week, in the case of Mar-a-Lago and other information that potentially Donald Trump was feeding his attorneys, and that the special prosecutor, pulled this mammoth, criminal fraud exception, which is a big deal. Which means he's got information to do so, right? And that's a separate scenario, but that could lead to revelations, for example, that Donald Trump was potentially selling something to someone. What he was selling, we don't know yet. What I would speculate is he's potentially, because he's very, very out front with his relationship with Saudi Arabia, considering his son-in-law and his former Treasury Secretary are basically in business together to do deals with the Saudi government and Qatar, and I can't remember who else from the Gulf states recently just did a deal to the tune of billions, okay? Absolute corruption and insanity, but you put that and you layer that on top of everything that I know, and I don't understand millions of you don't know, which includes the likes of what we knew about Saudi's involvement with 9/11. I've said over and over and over that, and I hate to say that because that becomes a little bit monotonous, so I apologize to you guys if you've heard me say that over and over. But it's like beating a drum, or beating, I don't know what the analogy is, but the magnitude of Saudi is insanity. We know that the hijackers in the cells were funded by the wife of then Bandar bin Sultan, who was probably the most visible Saudi from the royal family in the United States, who had huge interests in the likes of Fox News, for example. And I think he was worth, I don't know, I know he was worth at least 22 billion or something like that. That was probably years ago when I saw it in Forbes magazine. I don't even know if he's still alive, to be honest with you. I'm pretty sure he is. But the bottom line is he's not in control. MBS is in control right now. But he comes from the previous generation of Saudis that, his wife is paying for the terror cells. And we know that the FBI knew that they were in the country. And we had eyes on them in the flight schools, and we knew that they weren't learning how to land. I mean, come on. We're talking about an intelligence apparatus in the United States of like 50 billion a year. They could look up your ass from space right now if they wanted to. The only reason that 9/11 happened was because somebody let it happen. I don't believe for a second that, considering the information that we had, that we, except for the buffoonery of what does happen in corruption with agencies. Now, this is the only thing that I would say that could potentially have allowed the terrorists to slip through the cracks, which would be, for example, in the 2008 great financial crisis, what we show you in the con is that all of the whistleblowers, all of the people from every step of the way that are the stopgaps to make sure that the system is working properly, went to their bosses, went to the authorities, went to the boards, went to the CEOs, went to the investigation agencies like the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Office of Thrift Supervision and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and attorneys from different states and AG's office brought these revelations to light as well. And all of them failed to put the whole picture together, least of which was media. Now, there was a lot of media that did great work, but they did it in sort of sections. And then when the world blew up, just like 9/11, then everybody's focusing on different things to kind of get their voice out there, to get their audience and everything else. And that's what happens in a fractured marketplace when everybody's fighting for eyeballs, which kind of brings it full circle, quite frankly, to 60 Minutes last night and whoring themselves out to put a freaking idiot on camera to bloviate lies. And I can only imagine Lesley Stahl and what she would challenge him. If everything I've seen in the past is any indication, it wouldn't have been strong, nor would it have been an indictment of Marjorie Taylor Greene, which is probably the only reason I could justify interviewing Marjorie Taylor Greene on a platform like that. So what does it all mean without me going on for like 2 hours, which I don't have the time to do, and you're not going to listen to? What it all means is that the entire system is a lie. The entire system is covering up what's important so that the presumed nature and the skeleton and the foundations and the machinery and all of the details of how a government of, by, and for the people operates with the integrity of law to hold power to account is a joke. That's not what it does. Neither does, as much as based on everything I've just revealed to you, the media doing its job to hold power to account. All of that is a myth. And what it breeds is lies, which breeds ignorance, which breeds the kind of problems that we're in the midst of that could even get worse. What I say all the time is corruption births fascism. And I say also all the time that I am the only guy literally in the entire freaking world that I've ever come across that is telling any of you that Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally in 2009, and I have the evidence, to backdoor trillions upon trillions of dollars to the bankrupted financial sector that got bankrupted based on everything we show you in the con. And the way I was able to do that was to get millions of dollars to go do the work. And that's what it costs to do journalism, which has also been destroyed in this day and age because we can get so much media and most of it's for free. And so the way it works with producers is that they've got to go find sponsors where you can justify big spends because you get the eyeballs, but basically you're not going to become a threat to their problems. So, for example, looking at 60 Minutes, I mean, those of you who grew up or came up in the late 90s, you might remember The Insider. And The Insider was when it was revealed that the parent company of CBS, Viacom, was also heavily invested with the interests of, the name of the largest, Philip Morris, the largest tobacco producer in the United States, and really pretty much what fueled the growth of the United States from the very beginning, which led to slavery, of course, because the plantations of tobacco, which was one of our biggest exports, through the first part of our evolution. And so as a result of that, 60 Minutes had found information that the experts and the scientists and the company and everybody knew that the cigarettes caused cancer. And they did it intentionally, and they lied to cover it up. And then it led to all sorts of series of scenarios that took place at that time period that I think culminated with massive lawsuits based on this information from the state AGs to recoup some of the healthcare costs that millions of people were dying and going to the hospitals for cancer over the course of decades, when Philip Morris, of course, knew that they were selling a product that would lead to cancer. And so Philip Morris was on the hook for that, and ultimately they got sued. But the business interests were aligning. This is what happens in a corporate fascist state, where you end up with aligned interests of shareholders and giant companies that have got to quash the truth. And that's what they did. And ever since, 60 Minutes has just basically been a whore for A, their sponsors, and B, the eyeballs that they get, by pulling bullshit. They're just one example of the entire sea of media. We have more media. We just have different versions of lies that try to find people's touchstones and bullet points through psychology to lie to you. And I'm not lying to you. I'm explaining to you how the Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally against its own statutes. And all you got to do is read the statutes to understand what the sort of capacity of the Federal Reserve to be the lender of last resort was never intended to backstop racketeering and massive corruption that would lead to literally the destruction of at least 50 million Americans and then tens of millions more around the world. That then blew up the world based on lies across the board, which we show you in the con, that ultimately, and I've got much, much, much more information, and I've also got another podcast that I did with the Real Progressives called The New Untouchables. A lot of this information is there. You can go to my Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con on YouTube, and you can study it. You can go to Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con on TikTok if you want to see me saying different variations of the same thing over the last year. I think I've probably got over 1,000 hours worth of information there. The long and the short of it is I've come to this point, and I got to get on a phone call right now. I've got 2 phone calls right now that, to kind of give you an example of what I'm doing in addition to trying to wake up this country to save democracy, because I don't want to stand, and I'm not going to kneel to the deception and lies and the antics that create corruption that then lead to fascism. I'm not going to freaking yield to that. That's not who I am. I am a patriot. I'm a patriot who understands American history, who understands the American Revolution, who understands the edict of, let's say, the likes of Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. I understand Thomas Jefferson. I understand John Adams. I understand the French philosophers like Locke and Rousseau and Hobbes and some of the others that, led to the notion of liberty against the idea of the divine rights of kings and the corruption of just stupidity. I'm a freaking American, which means I'm dynamic, which means I believe in the American dream and I pursue it with every single thing I've got. And so that brings me to the conversation I'm about to have with one of the biggest production companies in Hollywood for something that's completely different than this, a fantastical, fictional science fiction like Bill and Ted's meets, somewhere in Star Wars and much more, which I've got huge names attached and it's freaking brilliant. And I think I'm gonna hit a home run. that's what I think. And I think this is going to come to you and be seen by tens of millions of people because it's just something that I got to do because it's awesome and something that I love to do. That's one side of what I do. And then the other side of it is that I'm dealing with one of the largest well-known celebrities in the world to basically voice over different documentaries that my partner and I have that are going to generate different versions of all of the stuff that I'm revealing to you that go way back to the 80s. And I think the last thing I'll say in summation to the different audiences that are out there. I don't understand the analytics of those of you who are actually watching this, and I appreciate those that you have liked and subscribed. Please like and subscribe to Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con. Please share this with 13 people so that they understand that there's somebody that is actually speaking the truth, who knows what he's doing, who has the information, who's gone the distance, the sacrifice that I've been involved with. This is not easy. I've laid everything on the line, basically lost my family, destroyed my family. The sacrifice that I've done in the process is insane. But I do it for liberty and justice for all. And ultimately, the top level A-list celebrity that will hopefully give me the goods to be able to tell these stories in a way that I've got to manipulate to be able to tell audiences what they want to see, which is like, okay, look, there's a lot of great truths that we can deliver through these incredible documentaries that we have, but I got to set it up as like sex, lies, and real estate, to be honest with you. Okay, because that's what sings with acquisitions execs, and you got to make sure that you don't piss off the machine behind the machine that funds everything. So the dilemma about everything I'm telling you, whether it's 60 Minutes or whether it's the network Viacom, that platform 60 Minutes, or even all of the major players, especially in the streaming space, they all have to get their money from somewhere in terms of financing what it is to get them to get eyeballs so that we all subscribe to make sure that we're watching the content that we want to be entertained by. And sometimes we like it more than others. And we're just consumers at that stage. I'm saying you're a citizen, okay? That's what you have to think about if you are engaged with what I'm doing here on this platform. And me driving forward, and I tell you, I failed miserably last week. I said at the beginning of last week, I needed to get 1,300 Patriot investors to invest in the tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption that will redeem and reinvigorate and resurrect the American dream. That's my campaign. By the way, is it a presidential campaign? It could be, and I hope it does become, because it's got to be a multifaceted campaign that I bring all of these truths, all of these things that I'm telling you on a barnstorming tour to get millions of people out of their house, out of their phones, out of their television sets, out of their comfort zone, which many of them, based on the numbers that we're seeing, are basically on a razor's edge of losing, just like tens of millions have already have, and get us all come together so that I can reveal to you that the emperor wears no clothes. That's the whole point of this thing, because media has got such an overwhelming, like this blob, this thing that just overcomes people's ability to think critically and understand. Because I think if I were to ask everyone, it doesn't matter if you're an 18-year-old or if you're a senior, do you expect the United States to work premised on the law? Do you expect the United States to work based on fairness and based on opportunity and based on those things that everybody has a shot to become whoever they want to be, and they've got to navigate their lives accordingly? I'd say 99% of you would think that way. Kind of an interesting corollary, because 1% of you would be like, no, shut the fuck up, sit down, do what I tell you, because you're my slave, you're my indentured servant, I own you, and I want everything for myself, which leads me to the biggest revelation of all. The top 1%, which is really under these circumstances, the top 0.001%, have been looting the Federal Reserve illegally to basically pay for deception in this insane casino capitalism in which they're playing the 3-card Monte that's more like the 26-card Monte. The level of the six-dimensional chess here is beyond your comprehension, what these guys have access to and what they bet on, the margins and everything else, and what they're trying to stimulate. I'm talking about the hedge funds and the asset managers and the rest of it. But what they all know and what they're all saying at this stage of the game is that don't worry. No matter how bad things get, and the next one that's coming has got to be the commercial real estate that's going to fall. And I think that's going to devastate regional banks. And then, of course, we'll see more bailouts, because that's what they all know. All of the gamblers in this casino, this late-stage death capitalism, that's this globalism that has absolutely no fundamentals. Imagine trying to fly a plane like this. You'd all die every single time. The only ones that wouldn't would be the guys that are somehow suckering you to get on the plane, that own the airline, that I don't know how they're getting you on the plane when you know it's gonna crash over and over. That's That's what they're doing. And they get to pick up everything on the cheap because government works for the rich. The Federal Reserve's mandate is supposedly full employment and 2% inflation. No, it's not. It's to maintain the rich and the assets of the rich in the stock market and to make sure that the multinationals, because what they've done in this grand march of humanity is that we've had to create society and civilization and shared. I mean, globalism has been around since the very beginning of time, ever since we've evolved, through and during and after Africa to the Silk Road routes and all of the trade throughout the world, and that led to the discovery of the United States after the North Americans, came 2,000 years ago, blah, 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 right? The bottom line is there has been trade forever. And in that trade, there's different variations of how that trade occurs, and a lot of the times it led to things like imperialism, which the founding fathers knew was slavery for them. And they broke the bonds of bondage. Why? Because they wanted to live free and have liberty. And that was what was more important to them than anything else. And they knew they could figure stuff out as long as they weren't under the thumb of King George III at that time. And all of the previous monarchs. I mean, why do I have to explain history to you? That's the thing. There is no patriotic zeal amongst most Americans. You're just blah. That's the only thing I can figure. Because, I mean, I mentioned this on Twitter yesterday. It's like, I'm sorry to have to tell you right and wrong. But who doesn't understand that a criminal apparatus in the United States that looted or set up tens of millions of people, bought our government, looted the treasury, destroyed millions of lives, used the courts to do it, can do that with impunity without being held accountable? I mean, just the very notion of it is insanely un-American, but yet that's what happened. And it's never stopped because of everything I'm telling you. So whether you're an older white male who watches me, who's had your life basically turned upside down, the reason you want to invest in me is because I'm investing in the future to freaking wrest control back for the patriots of the United States. And you should know that. And so that's why you would invest $13 and tell 13 people. If you're young and you're just coming up and you're looking at the world around you and you're trying to think to yourself, God damn, is this guy nuts? Or is he the real deal? I'm the real deal. The entire system of this monstrosity of lies and media is going to come falling down, and I'm going to be the last man standing with the truth. I'm going to make sure I fucking pound this into millions of people's heads until I'm last man standing. But last man standing, united, not on top of, united with millions of us, so I can bring the freaking A-team, the untouchables, to the fold to purge corruption. Using the law to do it with millions of people behind us. Why? Because if you're young, if you get into the debt bubble, let's say you go out and you take loans for your college, right? You can go get loans pretty easily for college, and you're on the hook. Well, unless you become a doctor, unless you're willing to go through the righteous grind of like 15 years of paying back monstrous loans to finally get to a place where you can finally support your family in your 40s after you've dedicated your life to that, there are people who do that heroically, and God bless you. Thank God doctors exist. They're the most magnificent people in the world, and they earn the money that they make, okay? They're, by the way, a 1% that's quite different than a lot of other people out there want to frame the 1%. There are others that are, people that, might go to college, get huge loans, and go to a job where you don't realize that you're never going to be able to pay back those loans, and then you're never really going to be able to have your piece of the American dream because it's way out of reach. What I'm doing on the economic side is trying to lay the level of the land to be what it's supposed to be, because when you unleash the creative spirits of the American people, amazing things happen, whether it's technology, where it's see a need, fill a need, whether it's somebody coming up with a great club concept, with a great restaurant, and people go to those things and spend money, and it's vibrant, and everybody's making money, and everybody's doing whatever they do to be able to, if the middle class is dynamic and growing, that's the world that I want to live in. Not to where the upper crust 1% is growing like parasites by destroying everybody else, and then the full faith and credit of the United States is used to basically stuff their fat pig faces, just like Donald Trump, who's a pig. And he's worse than a pig, because what he is at this moment in time to me is the lightning rod to keep everybody's attention from what it is that I'm telling you. You've got to turn on the light. You've got to open up the door. You've got to walk through the hallway. You've got to go back and find everybody you can to come through. And together, if you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity, integrity, sustainability, and liberty, unites, we will defeat tyranny. And that's our destiny. Please, rise, roar, revolt. don't hesitate. Reach into your wallet, find the GoFundMe at the bottom of this, and invest $13 and go find 13 people to join us. The democracy, the future of the world, and quite frankly, your survival depends on it. I'm offering you a lifeline to redemption. This is exodus from the bonds of debt slavery and everything that constitutes to the liberation of the resurrection that will lead to the resurrection of the American dream. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm not Lesley Stahl. I'm not Rachel Maddow. I'm sure as shit not Anderson Cooper. And I'm sure as shit squared not Tucker Carlson. In the end, my value, I've got more courage and more information in my pinky than all of them combined, multiplied by 29 trillion. Onwards and upwards.